Masechet Zevaḥim Daf Mem Tet. Ashkechan shechita be'ola lemisva, kabbalah name lemisva ashkechan, shechita ve'kabbalah le'akev minelan. So far, we have a source that when it comes to a korban olah, one should do shechita in the north, lechatechila, and one also should do the kabbalah of the dam in the north, lechatechila. We have sources for that. However, we do not yet have sources regarding a korban olah that shechita and kabbalah have to be in the north and it's otherwise disqualified. We did bring sources for this for korban hatat, but not for korban olah. So we want to know, how do you know it's me'akev for shechita and kabbalah to be in the north in the korban olah? Amar Rav Ada bar Ahava v'itema Rabba bar Shela kal v'chomer u'ma chatat haba'a mikoach olah me'akevet olah sheba'a chatat mikocha eno din sheme'akevet. We can learn it from a kal v'chomer. Chatat itself was derived from a korban olah that you have to do shechita in the north to begin with. The Torah says explicitly regarding a korban olah that has to be in the north. And then it tells us, make the chatat in the same place that one does shechita on the olah. So, if korban chatat, which is itself derivative, and yet we learned that it must be in the north, me'akev, then olah, which is the source from which chatat comes, all the more so that it will be required in the source. The idea is that the source is probably going to be stronger than the derivative. However, we reject this because we can counter this kal v'chomer because chatat has a stringency in that it atones for people that are liable to karet, whereas a korban olah does not do that. Amar Ravina hakashya leRav Ada bar Ahava klum asinu tafel hamur min ha'ikar. Ravina says that this counter was difficult for Rav Ada bar Ahava, who proposed the original kal v'chomer, because he said, can there be such a thing where the tafel, the secondary prohibition, that's less and going to be less powerful, will be more stringent than the primary prohibition, the source from which you learned it? So if you're going to reject this kal v'chomer, you're going to end up with a situation where the law of doing shechita in the north is primarily found in korban olah. Then we derive it to korban hatat. And now you're going to tell me that because we have other derivations for korban hatat, we learned that korban hatat, it's me'akev, and you're going to tell me that that's me'akev for korban hatat, and for a korban olah, to do it in the north, it's just lechatechila. You should try to do it, but if you didn't do it in the north, it's still okay. So that the source is going to be more lenient than the tafel. That's crazy. And now we're going to cite a few different cases where it does seem that the derivative is more powerful than the source. So let's see. One example number one. Maaser sheni, if you have produce, you live far away, no problem, you can simply redeem it for money. However, that which you buy with kesef maaser, you cannot redeem. Once you take that money and you buy other food with it in Yerushalayim, and now you say, I changed my mind, I want to change it back into money. No, you cannot do so. How do we know that this is the law? Ditnan, halakol bekesef maaser shenitma yipadeh. Rabbi Yehuda omer yikaber. Nitma in lo nitma la. The Mishnah Masechet Maaser Sheni says, if you buy food with money of Maaser Sheni, and that food became tameh, then yes, then you can redeem it because it's tameh. So you have to redeem it. You can't. It's holy. You can't eat maaser sheni while tameh, while it's tameh. So then yes, in that case you can redeem it. Rabbi Yehuda says no, even that you can't redeem. You have to bury it. But for Tanakh Kama, only if it becomes tameh you can redeem it. But if not, it didn't become tameh, then you cannot redeem it. That's the law for the secondary thing. The primary thing, the original produce, you can redeem even if it's still tahor. So here we do have a case where The tafel, the secondary thing, is more stringent. You cannot redeem it. Whereas the original produce is less stringent because you can redeem it even while it's tahor. So what's your problem? Why are you saying this is a general rule? Here is an exception. And the answer is no, this is not an exception. There's a different reason why one cannot redeem the second produce. Hatam la alima kedushate lemitpas pidioneh. It's because the second produce's holiness is not so strong such that the redemption money would be able to grasp it. So it's actually because the primary produce is so holy, it's the original holiness of the Maaseh Sheni Kedusha. Since it's so holy, it's easy for it that holiness to jump onto the money. So it can do so in any case. But then once you buy produce secondarily, that's already weakened. It's like a copy of a copy on a photocopy machine. It's a little bit weaker, and therefore it doesn't have the power to automatically jump to the money. That's the reason. V'hareh timura. Okay, another counter example. Timura, a substitution. If you have one animal that's holy, and you say, I want to substitute it for animal B, then animal A and animal B both become holy. So animal A is the origin, is the ikad, and animal B is the tafel. So it should be more lenient. But look at this law. De'ilu kodashim la chalia ba'amum kabua, v'ilu ihi chayla. If the animal has a permanent blemish, it's missing a limb to begin with, and the primary one, if I go and say, this is going to be holy, this animal is going to be holy, the holiness does not apply to it. In fact, does apply only as monetary, monetary holiness, kedushat mamon, and then you could just redeem it, and then that's it. The animal has no after effects. That's true for the original animal. Yet, if I have an animal and I do a timurah, and now animal B is now sacred, that one, the animal B, even if it had a blemish from before, it gets kedushat haguf. And although I can redeem it, even after redemption, it still cannot be used for labor. Its wool cannot be used. It's actually kedushat haguf. So here we have a case where the original is less stringent in that it does not get kedushat haguf if it's blemished. But if I take now just a regular animal and I make it holy and I do timurah, and the timurah has a blemish, the timurah does get kedushat haguf. So that's a rejection of that rule. And the answer is no, that's not the reason. Timurah mikoach kodashim ka'atya, the kodashim mikoach chulin ka'atya. The timurah, animal B, that came from the power of a holy animal. That's why it has more power. Whereas the original animal started off just as chulin. So that's why the original animal, if it has a blemish, starts as just chulin. I'm just come and say, this is going to be a holy animal? Nah, it's only holy kedushat mamon. I can't make it into a korban olah. But if I have an animal that is 100% holy, and it is copied then to the second animal, the timurah, now it's getting its power from something that is already holy, which is stronger. And that's why it applies even to a second, if the second animal has a blemish. Hare Pesach. Okay, another counterexample to the rule. Tehu enot ta'on semicha unsachim utnufat chazeh v'shok. Ve'ilu motar dideh ta'on semicha unsachim utnufat chazeh v'shok. A Korban Pesach, the original Korban Pesach itself, does not require semicha. You don't have to bring the accompanying wine libations, and you don't have to wave the breast and the thigh. All those do not apply to Korban Pesach. However, if that animal that I designated for Korban Pesach, I don't use on the 14th of Nisan, and I end up using it later on, sometime later, then it turns into a shelamim. And as a shelamim, that's the motar, that's the secondary status. It was a Pesach, that's the ikad, and now it turns into shelamim, which is the tafel. Now I have to do semicha, and I have to bring the sachim, and I have to wave those inner parts. So you see that the derivative is more stringent than the original. Isn't that a counterexample? We say no. Pesach b'sharimot hashana shelamim hu. It's not that. It's not secondary. It's the Korban Pesach on the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon. Other days of the year, it's a shilamim. It's not derivative that now it got its power from a Pesach to another item. It's the very same item, and now this item is a shilamim, so it has all the laws of shilamim. So it's not even, you shouldn't even categorize it as a derivative. So therefore, we don't find any exceptions to this rule, and in fact, in all cases, the derivative is going to be less stringent than the original, and because that's true, we can apply that also to a korban olah in hatat. If we know that hatat, which is a derivative, doing these services in the north is absolutely required, then it has to be that the original law will not be less stringent, but also it will be true that it has to be done in the north. That's one answer to the original question. A second answer, short one, could be because we have an extra pasuk that you will slaughter the korban hatat in the place of ha'olah. And it says this pasuk already before. Why do we need it again? So the repetition of this pasuk is to teach me that not only is it required to do shechita and kabbalah of a korban olah in the north, it's actually absolutely required. Now we move to the next type of korban, and we ask, Asham minalan deba'e safon. Asham is also a kodesh kodashim, and according to the Mishnah, it also has to be slaughtered in the north. But what's the source in Pesukim? The answer is Dichti b'mkom asher yishchatu et ha'olah yishchatu et ha'asham. Here it says in the pasuk, in the place that you do shechita for the olah, which is the north, that's where you should do shechita for the asham. Ashkechan shechita kabbalah minalan. All right, we have a source for shechita in the north, but how about kabbalah for an asham? Ve'et damo yizrok. The rest of the pasuk says, and you will sprinkle its blood. Kibul damo nameh basafon. So we can learn from here that also receiving is also in the north, because the receiving of the blood would be right after the shechita and before the zirika of the blood. So since this comes in quick succession in the pasuk, so you're doing shechita, that's in the north, and then right after that you're going to have to go and do zirika. So the only thing you're doing between is the kabbalah. So there you're already in the north. So that shows that the kabbalah has to be in the north. Now that's true. Now that we know that the animal has to be in the north, but how do you know that the receiver, kohen, has to be in the north? Damo ve'et damo, because of the extra word ve'et, to include the kohen who's receiving the blood. Ashkechan the mitzvah la'akev minalan. So now we learned that we should do that lechatechila. But how do we know that even b'di avad, this is absolutely required, and if you don't do it in the north, then the korban is invalid. There's a pasuk that is said regarding the asham that is brought by a mesorah. It says v'shachat et hakebes. The continuation of the pasuk, as actually here, so I'll just quote it from here. V'shachat et hakebes b'mkom asher yishchat et hachatat v'ta'olah b'mkom hakodesh ki kachatat hasham hu. It says right here that you're going to slaughter the kebes in the same place that you do shechita on a chatat and an olah. So that's how you know an asham is in the north, just like a chatat and the korban olah. So that's an added pasuk. That's a repetition. We already know it from Vayikra 7. Why does it say it again in Vayikra Yud Dalid? So for the general rule, when something is repeated, that means it's not just a mitzvah, it's me'akev. Wait a second, this pasuk for Mesorah, is it really repeated here in order to teach us the general rule that Asham in the north is me'akev? We already need it for a different purpose, to teach us laws within Mesorah itself. Because we have a general rule. If you have a law that was already included in a generality, the generality is the pasuk that we just saw up here from Vayikra 7 that talks about all korban hasham. And now you have another law that would have been included in it, and yet it's excluded. A new thing comes to teach about a new context That's this law in Mesorah. So it's saying, there's an exception. There's a general rule, Asham. This is the law of Asham, has to be in the same place. And now you're telling me, another law that you didn't tell me otherwise, I would have included it in the general category. But now it's coming from as an exception to the general category to teach something new. You cannot take, if there's any other details in that new spot, that's Vayikra 14, you cannot apply any of those new things back to the general rule for all Asham, unless the pasuk explicitly tells you can apply it also to the generality. Usually, if you have one pasuk, we say binyan av, it says it here, it applies to everything else in that category. But if you already have a klal, and you have then something that's a subcategory, that is specifying something in that subcategory, that means all the details in that subcategory will only apply to that subcategory, unless there's an indication that you can use those subcategory things to apply to the entire general rule. So this is going to be relevant here. Kesad. What's an example? ושחט את הכבש במקום אשר ישחט את החטאת, ואת העולה במקום הקודש, כי כחטאת האשם הוא. This pasuk regarding Mesorah says that we will slaughter the animal in the place that you also slaughter a chatat and olah. And this one is a asham. Why? Because the chatat is the same as an asham. Even within that pasuk, it makes the comparison twice to a chatat and olah, and then to a chatat. Now, why do we need this? Why do I need this ending, the end of the pasuk here, that's like a chatat and asham? I already know, I said before. So what is this coming to add? לפי שעשה אשם מסורה לידון בדבר החדש, בבוהן יד ובוהן רגל ואוזן ימנית. יכול לא יהיה טעון מתן דמים. Because the law of the Mesorah is excluded from the generality, meaning it repeats the laws again, because it has to teach me something new, that the Korban of the Mesorah is unique, has a new law, a new aspect in that the blood is going to be applied to the big finger, the thumb, the big toe, and the ear of the Mesorah, the right one. And that does not apply to other korbanot. So therefore, I might have thought that, what do you do with the blood? You apply it to the body of Mesorah, and maybe you think that you do not put the blood or the innards on the Mizbeach. You put it on the Mesorah instead of the Mizbeach. Since I might have thought that, because here's something unique. How am I supposed to know that you're supposed to do two things with the blood? Talmud Omar, kachatat hashamhu. That's why I need the pasuk to say, by the way, besides putting the blood on the Mesorah's body, also you do the other things as you would like a chatat and like an asham, and apply the blood and the innards on the Mizbeach. Ma chatat teuna matan damim ve'morin legabe Mizbeach, avasham Mesorah teun matan damim ve'morin al gabe legabe Mizbeach. So, what do we see so far here? That we apply this rule. Here we have something that would have been in the general category of Hasham, but it has to be excluded and mentioned specifically because it has a different aspect that you take the blood and put it on the body. And so therefore, even the other things that it says here, that this Hasham is like Korban Hatat and like Korban Olah, that is needed for this current context, and therefore I cannot use it to learn something about Asham in general. And so I cannot use Vayikra 14 as an extra pasuk to teach me Me'akev. And so now we don't have a source that Korban Asham in the north is Me'akev. We have an answer. If indeed the law was that a Korban Asham is only a mitzvah lechetechila to slaughter in the north, but it's not me'akev, if so, then the Torah simply could have written the law that a Korban Asham is like a Korban Chatat here regarding the Mesorah, and then I would have derived from here to all the other types of Korban Asham, and then I would have known it. But the fact that it's repeated also elsewhere in Vayikra for a general Asham, so now, in fact, there are two. And I could learn, I'll use this one as the original and that one as the repetition. And then I learned that it is, in fact, Me'akev. Okay, that is a partial answer. Hani cha'i sevira lan yasa lidon b'davar hechadash ihu dela gamar mikelalo aval kelalo gamar mine shapir. That answer will work if you understand the rule that we said over here, when something is considered an exception, it says you can't learn. Which way can you not learn? So if you say that something that is removed from the general category as an exception, because it wants to teach you a new law, that in law, meaning the law of Mesorah, one cannot learn from the generality. In other words, because it's presented as an exception, you cannot learn from the general category to this exception. But the other way around, you can do, but you can learn from that individual item to the generality. So then this derivation would be fine, since it says that you have to slaughter in the same place regarding Mesorah, and I can learn the other way, if it's true for Mesorah, is true for all others. This rule is just telling me that I can't learn from the generality that necessarily applies to this exception. That's why I would think, this exception is different, and that's why I don't have to do the other offerings on the Mizbech, and it has to teach me that. So then I would have an answer. But there is another interpretation of this rule that says, Ela isi bidalan, tela hu gamar mikelalo vela kelalo gamar mineh, hai legufei isterich. The other version says that the exceptional case, that of Mesorah, you cannot derive from it to the general category, nor from the general category to it. Once you're excluding this from the general law, then it's sealed off and you can't learn anything from it. In that case, we still are looking for a source. That general Korban Asham is absolutely necessary, because we have only one pasuk for the general Asham, and from there we can only learn the Chatechila. And so the answer is Kevan ahdere. We said that the rule above is you can't learn anything unless the Torah brings it back explicitly. So we could say that the ending of that pasuk that says it's like a chatat, it's like kachatat ka'asham. That's saying, these are the same. So that's bringing it back and saying, you know what, you can open up the channels. In fact, whatever you saw here, you can learn for the general category. So now we have two Pesukim, and that's Me'akev. Amar le morzutra bered rab maril ravina ema ki ahdere kera legabe matan damim ve'emurim deba'ai kehuna ava shechita de la ba'ya kehuna lami ba'ya safon. But we have a challenge to this. Maybe when the pasuk returns and says, yes, you can learn things back and forth, maybe that's only regarding the placement of the blood and the innards on the Mizbeach, because that is done by a Kohen. But Shechita, which is not done by a Kohen, maybe not. Maybe we're not opening the channels for everything, even for that. And it's not absolutely required that be in the north. But we respond, Imken nema keraki kachatat hu, my kachatat ha'asham, kishar hashamot yihye. No, if it was just that way, then it could have just said, because it's like the chatat. You wouldn't have to repeat the word ha'asham. And so therefore the word ha'asham is extra to tell me, this asham of Mesorah is like all other ashamot. And so therefore this is in fact explicitly reopening the channel and saying, yes, you can compare this to all other Korban Ashams, and therefore we in fact have two Pesukim that compare Asham to other Kodesh Kodashim, and since you have two Pesukim, we learn that not only is it Lechatechila, but it's even Me'akev that it be performed in the north. The Gemara now continues its explanation of this pasuk about the Asham Mesorah and asks, Lama li lakshuye lechatat? Lama li lakshuye le'olah? Here's the pasuk again, that one slaughters the keves in the place that one slaughters the chatat and the olah. B'mkom HaKodesh, ki kachatat Hashem hu lakohen kodesh kadashim hu. So why does it have to compare it to both the chatat and also the olah? One would be enough. We know that the olah has to be in the north. That's the original place where the Torah says so. We derived from there that the chatat also is in the north, but it'd be sufficient to just say just one of them, and then I would know that this asham is in the north. אמר רבינה הסתריך, אי אקשה לחטאת ולא אקשה לעולה, הווה אמינא, חטאת מהיכן למדה מעולה. דבר הלמד בהקש, חוזר מלמד בהקש. If the Torah, Ravina says we need it because if the Torah only said that the asham is like a chatat and did not connect it to an olah, then I would have thought, well, chatat itself, where do we learn it from? From an olah. And therefore, I would assume that something that is derived from a hekesh can teach something else also by a hekesh. I would assume that you can link two hekeshes to each other, and it says it just by it only connects chatat asham to chatat. But we say that's okay. You can apply this double rule, and then you have olah as the original source, hekesh to chatat, and this pasuk says that the chatat is like the asham. And I would think that in general you can combine two hekeshim, but that's not true. That's why it says olah also to say, listen, if you just had chatat, you would not be able to join two hekeshim. And so actually, it says olah in order precisely to tell me that you cannot learn it with two hekeshes by themselves. You need the olah connection here. Amar le morzutra bered Rav Mari le Ravina v'nikshe le'olah v'la nikshe le'chatat. So if so, why doesn't the pasuk just say that the asham is like an olah? And olah, that's one hekesh. Olah is the original source, and they have one hekesh, and don't mention chatat at all. Why bother mentioning chatat? Hava amina davar halamed behekesh chozer umlamed behekesh. If the Torah had only mentioned olah, that the Hashem is like an olah, and learned it directly, then I would have thought that in general, one could put one hekesh together with another hekesh. And here it doesn't do that, it's just connecting to olah directly. Now, if you will object to that, v'chitema nikshe akushe lechatat nichale demakish le'ikad v'lanakish le'letafel. That if so, that you can connect two hekeshim together, you might ask, well, then why doesn't the Torah connect it only to chatat? Say asham is like a chatat because I can learn a double hekesh, chatat to olah and olah to asham. And so, if really you could connect two hekeshim together, then it should have written chatat. But the answer to that would be that the Torah would prefer to connect it, make a hekesh to the main source, olah, and not to the derivative source. Even though perhaps you actually could do a double hekesh. And so that's why the Torah had to put both, lachi akshe lechatat ve'akshe le'olah, lememar davar halamed behekesh, eno chozer umlamed behekesh. The Torah connects asham and says it's like a chatat and like an olah, in order to teach you this very rule, that something that is learned from a hekesh, you cannot go and learn another hekesh from it. Rava Amar mehachad ichtiv kasher yuram mishor zebach hashelamim lemay hilcheta ili yoter takabed ushte kaleot begufe ketib. Rava says, I agree with the rule that you cannot make a double hekesh, but I learned it from a different source. The pasuk says regarding the par hatat of a kohen gadol, that you have to take the kidneys and the fat and the diaphragm with the liver, and you have to put that on the mizbeach. And then right after that it says, as it is taken from the ox of a shelamim, you also do for this. Now, why do you have to compare them? If it's comparing this chatat to a shelamim in order to teach me that the section, the diaphragm and the liver and the two kidneys have to be sacrificed, well, you don't need the comparison because the pasuk right before just said that you have to take these sections and put them on the mizbeach. So I don't need you to tell me like a shelamim because you said it explicitly. So why do I need this comparison? משום דבעי אגמורי יותר תכבד ושתי הכליות מפד עליהם דבר של ציבור לסעירי עבודה זרה בגופי לכתיב מפד כהן משיח הוא דגמר. Because this source of pad kohen gadol is going to be the source in order to learn that you have to burn these sections of the diaphragm and the kidneys. We're going to learn from pad kohen gadol to pad alim davar shel sibur. And from there, we make a further connection to Sa'ir of Avodah Zarah, if a community does Avodah Zarah. Now, that's going to be a double Hekesh. How can we make a double Hekesh? And it itself, in Pad Helim Davar Shel Sibur, it doesn't say that you offer these inner parts on the Mizbeach. So where do we get it from? From Pad Kohen Mashiach Hu Degamar. And we learn it from there. And then we have a problem because we can't make a Hekesh and another Hekesh. And that's why it says this extra line that the Pad Kohen Gadol is like a Shelamim. And therefore, it actually says regarding Pad Kohen Gadol basically twice. That says explicit put the innards on, and then it says it's like a Shelamim. And because it says it twice regarding the Pad Kohen Gadol, and you don't need it for Pad Kohen Gadol, so imeno inyan, if it's not needed for this, we'll apply it to something else. We'll apply it to Pad Helim Davar Shel Sibur. So therefore, it's as if it's already written in Pad Helim Davar Shel Sibur. As the Gemara says now, L'hachis tarich kasher yuram, teneve keman dechata begufeh. By writing kasher yuram in the Pad for Kohen Gadol, it's as if it's actually written in Pad Helim Davar Shel Sibur. V'la neve davar alamed Hekesh, chozer melamed behekesh, and that way it will not be a double Hekesh, because since it's as if written already in Pad Helim Davar Shel Sibur, it's only one Hekesh from that to Seir Avodah Zarah. And so this is a source, because if you could make a double Hekesh, then you wouldn't need this part, Kasher Yuram, Mishor Zebech HaShelamim. If the Torah adds it on, it's because you cannot make a double Hekesh. Amar le Papa le Rava v'lichtebe begufe v'lanakish. Papa asks Rava, how come the Torah doesn't say that these innards have to be placed on the Mizbeach for the law of Pad Helim Davar Shel Sibur itself? Just say it there, and then we won't have to make the first Hekesh. We could have saved ourselves one Hekesh. And Rava answers, Ichata begufe v'la akish, hava amina davar halamed behekesh, chozer melamed behekesh. If the Torah had written within the passage of Pad Helim Davar Shel Sibur that you have to sacrifice these parts, then I would have said, okay, over here all you need is one Hekesh. But I would have thought that in general, in other cases, you can make a double Hekesh. Here we don't need to, but I wouldn't know that you can't do it in other cases either. And if you say that if indeed you could make a double Hekesh, then the Torah would have made it a double Hekesh, but it doesn't make a double Hekesh. So doesn't that by itself prove that you can't make a double Hekesh? And I would answer, no, the Torah didn't make a double Hekesh simply because he would rather write it in the law itself rather than make a double Hekesh, because it's preferable. And so I wouldn't know from the fact that it doesn't make a double Hekesh that you can't make a double Hekesh. That's why it says in the law of Pad Shel Kohen Gadol, it says the law itself that you have to put these up on the Mizbeach, the innards, and it also says we compare this to a Shelamim, and that extra law we compare this to a Shelamim. We make it as if it's not actually written here, but is actually written in Pad Helim Davar Shel Sibur using Imeno Inyan, and so that's why it actually placed it in the second in that middle law of Pad Helim Davar Shel Sibur, to teach me that, look, therefore, it's written explicitly in Pad of Kohen Gadol, and it's written explicitly in the Pad Helim Davar Shel Sibur, so that, look, we're only making one Hekesh, and then we can prove, it wrote it that way, so that in order to teach us that you cannot make a double Hekesh. Now we're going to ask about other ways of building an argument with two steps. Are these allowed? We're going to ask about Hekesh, Gezerah Shavah, Kal Vachomer Siman. That part will go into the next daf. So the Gemara asks, Davar lamed behekesh and chozer melamed mehekesh imed rava imed ravina. We already learned that if you learn something from one Hekesh, you cannot make another Hekesh on top of it. You can't make a double Hekesh. And we learned that either from Rava or from Ravina, as we said above. Davar halamed behekesh mahu sheyalamed begezerah shavah. But how about if you learned A to B with Hekesh and then B to C with the gezerah shavah? Can we do that? Tashema, Rabbi Natan ben Av Tolmos Omer, Minayin lepericha bebegadim shehi tehora, Nemar karachat vegabachat bebgadim, v'nemar karachat vegabachat ba'adam. So Rabbi Natan ben Av Tolmos said, how do you know that if an entire garment gets sarat, that it's pure? That's a law regarding a sarat for a person's body also. If a person's body is entirely metzora, he's tahor. Only part of it, then is tameh. So how do you know that's true for begadim? That if the whole beged it has sarat is tahor? Well, we learn it from a gezer hashava. It says the word karachat and gabachat regarding begadim. In that case, it's referring to the inside and outside of the garment. But it also says karachat and gabachat regarding a person. There it's talking about a person's head, a bald head and a forehead. So it's talking about two parts of his head. Now, even though it's talking about two different things, it's the same words. So we make a gezer hashava. Ma lehalan parach bechulo tahor, afkan parach bechulo tahor. And so we compare them. Just like if a person's head entirely, his whole head has sarat, he's tahor. So too, regarding a beged, if the entire beged is mesorah, then also is tahor. Now, how do you know that this applies to a person's head? That if the whole head has sarat, he's tahor. The pasuk says about someone who has sarat from his head until his feet. ותקש ראשו לרגל. מה ללן כולו הפך לבן פרח בכולו טהור, אף כאן כולו הפך לבן פרח בכולו טהור. So this pasuk is making a hekesh, comparing the head to the legs. Just like in the case of one's body, if it entirely turns white and turns into sarat, he's tahor for his body. So too that's true for his head, that if his entire head turns white and the sarat spreads throughout it, it is tahor. So here you have a case where we're learning from sarat of the body to sarat of the head with a hekesh, and then using a gezer hashava to learn from sarat of the head to sarat of a beged. So in fact, we are using this double methodology. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, bechol Torah kol halemedin lamed milamed, chutz min hakodashim she'en danin lamed min lamed. So Rabbi Yochanan tells us a very important principle. Throughout the rest of the Torah, you can make one derivation attached to another. You can do a double derivation. That's okay in other laws like sarat. But for kodashim, if it has to do with sacrifices, then you cannot make a double derivation. So the answer is yes, you can do this, but only for sarat and other laws, not for kodashim. Dimken lo yomar safona ba'asham vetete begezer hashava de koche kodashim mehataot. Because after all, if you could make such a double derivation with regard to sacrifices, then you would not need the word safon regarding an asham, and you can learn it from a gezer hashava. It says the word koche kodashim regarding asham, and it says kodesh kodashim in hatat. So that's a gezer hashava. So then I could have hatat. We learn from olah. Olah is the original source that has to be done in the north, and from a hekesh we could learn from the korban olah to hatat, and then from korban hatat using koche kodashim we could learn to asham. But we don't do that. Instead, we had a whole separate derivation for that. And so you see that it does not apply to kodashim. Now, lav lememra de dabar halamed behekesh and chozer melamed begezer hashava. So doesn't that mean that, in fact, when it comes to kodashim, something that was learned from hekesh, you cannot then go also derive something else with the gezer hashava? Wait a second. Maybe the reason why we will not apply this gezer hashava plus hekesh is because you cannot learn from chatat, since chatat it atones for sins that are chayav karet, but asham does not. And so that would refute this gezer hashava. You say, okay, there is a gezer hashava, but hatat is more stringent, so you really can't compare it to asham. But I would answer to that, koche kodashim yetere ketibe. It says koche kodashim lots of times, more than just twice. And so these added instances of koche kodashim would strengthen that gezer hashava and would overcome this problem. So that's how we know that, in fact, one cannot add a gezer hashava on top of a hekesh. Baruch Adonai Laolam. Amen ve'amen.